My name is Mikko Hyppönen. This is the F-Secure Labs data security wrap-up for the year 2010. And in this video, we'll speak about targeted attacks and especially Operation Aurora. And to talk this with me, we have here Sean Sullivan, our security advisor. So what does it actually mean, a targeted attack?
Instead of a blanket attack or a shotgun approach where you send out a phishing message to dear generic occupant, it's instead targeted to specific individuals within an organization.
Right.
So I would go to, if it's F-Secure, I'd go to the About Us page, I'd go to the stockholder information, I'd look up that our CEO is Kimo, and I'd be like, dear Kimo.
Right. And the motive here isn't typically to make money.
Well, it depends on the target. There are lots of espionage attacks. There's corporate espionage attacks that, as we talked about, some of the guys that were arrested during the last year were interested in stock trading. You could get a lot of good insider information from targeting a CEO.
Yes, that's true as well. But if you look specifically at Operation Aurora, this is pretty obvious. Yeah. This is nation-sponsored, state-sponsored espionage. And this is the kind of activity we've been following for over 5 years now. And if you look at the targets in general, I mean, it seems to be again and again these different military contractors, companies that build technology for the armies of the world. They're a clear target. Then we have governments, ministries, parliaments, embassies, like governments in different entities. Barack Obama's presidential campaign was hit by one of these.
The campaign, I think John McCain's as well was exposed. A non-classified Pentagon network was hit a few years ago.
Then we have, as the last separate group, a completely different group, which is these different NGOs or freedom of speech groups. Typically, these work around the world, but they typically always support some of the minorities.
Free Tibet or Taiwan versus mainland China issues. Or
support Falun Gong or Falun Dafa, which are the forbidden religions inside China, or support the Uyghur minorities in northern China, and also, so on. So groups that somehow have a link to a minority within China, they seem to be again and again targeted. Now, if you look at what really happened with Operation Aurora, this came into news in January 2010, but it actually happened already in December. And it wasn't just Google that got hit. There were several other companies which were hit at the same time. As far as we know, the real target in the Google attack wasn't really Google itself or Google's technology. This attack was done to gain access to some NGO people who were using Google's Gmail to do their email. And the best guess is that these guys, the attackers, first tried to gain access directly onto the computers of the people who were the targets. And once they failed in doing that, they were being creative. Like, okay, if we can't infect these people's computers to get their data, they are using Gmail. Let's go to Google and get the content from there. But what about Adobe? Why were they hit?
Well, in a lot of these companies that were targeted, they were going after the source code management system. So from that point of view, why would you target Adobe as one of these companies? Well, Adobe, their PDF standard is a very popular standard in other targeted attacks. Aurora was IE6 based, which is an issue because lots of corporations still use IE6 because of software that only works within IE6. But PDFs is the other attachment-based sector that has grown and is the most popular at this point.
And the best way to find vulnerabilities in Adobe PDF Reader so you can do more attacks is
the source code.
If you have the source code, you can just look it from there. So
you can even add the source code if you were really in there long enough.
Which we don't know if this actually happened, and this is all our theory, but it's pretty plausible.
Because the numbers on PDFs have grown consistently. And as we were looking at the numbers, it's about 61-ish% of what we've seen now in 2010 in targeted attacks. So within our sample collections, samples that we've only received from one source.
Document files, which drop a backdoor when they are open. So let's look at the numbers. We've been tracking this for a number of years. If you look at here, we have the amount of targeted attacks that we have seen, which basically this means doc, PDF, XLS, PPT files, which we've received only once from one single source, which when opened will drop an executable. In 2008, we had 1,968 attacks like this. So it's a number which is comparable year to year. And last year, in 2009, the number went up to 2,195. So there is growth, but not massive growth. We see much more growth in traditional malware. And then when we look at what we've seen so far to the beginning of May in 2010, we've seen 1,290 attacks. So yes, it's still growing, but again, it's not exploding. This is not exponential growth. It's clear growth.
Well, it's not server-side polymorphism like the
Right.
regular malware that's out there is on demand. This is still custom-crafted, targeted stuff.
Yes, exactly.
But
Espionage.
it is a growth, though. I mean, it's going to 2.4 times at this rate what we saw last year. So it's growing.
Yes. And let's have a look at how this goes to different file types. In 2008, Word was the number one target. Word and PDF readers both are very, very popular, but they do have a clear difference also in the sense of how much vulnerabilities they had.
And because of Word macro viruses, people don't really trust Word. It's a historical knowledge that I can get infected from Word.
Right.
So a lot of organizations, if it's got a doc extension, it gets taken away, just
Right.
stripped right there at
Right.
the gateway.
Maybe that explains some of the change we've seen here, because if you compare 2008 to 2009, we'll see that the amount of PDF attacks against Adobe Reader just exploded.
Yeah, that like went from 28% to 49.5%.
Yeah. And have a look at this. This is the latest data. It's still growing. Until the beginning of May 2010, we've seen 61% of the attacks happening to Adobe Reader, and Word is still getting smaller.
Word dropped down to about 25%.
Right.
And now I've had reporters ask why PDF, and part of I think the explanation is Windows operating system has upgraded twice since we really saw a big problem with Word. We've had Vista, now we have 7, so Windows Update has really become Microsoft Update to a lot of extent. So Microsoft products as well as the OS have been hardened. 2 years ago, we used to refer to the Wednesday after Tuesday as Exploit Wednesday because they would reverse engineer the patch to find out what the vulnerability was, and then they would create an exploit for that and try to push it out there within the week to 2 weeks window that they had for everybody's automatic updates. Patched the vulnerability. That window has gotten smaller and smaller, so the return on investment is not worth it to try to use these Word exploits, these Excel exploits. Adobe Reader, on the other hand, it's much more difficult to update these things.
Yes. And there's no automation built in as it is on
They have gone to a quarterly schedule last year, and then this quarter, the beginning of 2010, they have enabled the updater service that's been built into Reader. So the latest versions of Reader now have an automatic update.
Which is great. And
Which is good.
it's been long overdue. Now, regardless of the file type, I mean, even if it's a doc file or a PPT file or XLS, once you receive it, convincing email, and you believe the email is real, and you open up the attachment, what happens then?
Well, typically if it's an exploit, there's also another social engineering exploit we can talk about, but the exploit will crash the PDF, relaunch a clean PDF as the decoy, and in
So
the background,
I get something on my screen.
get something on your screen
Right.
that looks convincing. Still, most people wouldn't notice it's a bit odd.
Right. And of course, in the background, the real payload is a backdoor. So it always drops an executable on the drive, and that executable is the one that actually connects away from your computer through the firewalls, through your personal firewall, through the corporate firewalls, to an IP address which could be anywhere in the world, and whoever happens to be sitting on that computer now has full backdoor access to all the data on the infected computer, plus full access to everything in your network that you can access as an end user of the network.
Now, the other thing I alluded to is that there's a social engineering attack that Stevens, first name is Didier, who found that the launch mechanism in Reader can launch executables, and all that is given to the end user is a prompt saying, do you trust this or not? And he found a way of exploiting that so that the message could change, saying you need to click OK in order to enable this.
Please click here, right
click
now.
here, right.
Which is very tricky. Though I don't think, though, we've seen that yet
Now,
in targeted attacks.
my question at this point is, in 2010, Apple, the Apple preview, the photo previewer, can preview PDFs, but Windows 7 cannot. And I think that's probably an antitrust issue, and Microsoft has played it safe, not wanting to antagonize Adobe by building in PDF viewing into Windows 7. But I think the time has come that Windows really should have PDF viewer functionality without all this JavaScript, without the launch functions, without the ability to exploit people.
And without the ability to embed movies and MP3s into PDFs, which is what you can do now.
When I get a PDF, I just want to be able to view it.
So the time is now. You've heard it here first. Thank you very much.